everybody, we're talking more with the Auburn University Bee Lab and East Alabama Bee Company to learn more about the bee colony, the bees' impact on agriculture, and how they're working with producers in the state. How big is a colony? So when you get down, what does the colony look like? How big is it?
So the honeybees that we have here, there's roughly 10 species, depending on who you ask. You might get a little bit different answer across the world. But we have a honeybee species that's called the western honeybee, Apis mellifera. And so it's a cavity nester. So they naturally nest in holes in trees, for example, or for example, the side of Comer Hall sometimes. And that's why we keep them in boxes. So it's kind of replicating that cavity.
Okay.
They also have multiple combs that hang vertically down. So those wax combs that they create, that's where they store their developing bees and they store their developing food. So when we open up one of these colonies, you'll see a series of parallel frames, and that's frames that are essentially mimicking like the natural situation of a honeybee colony if they were to nest in a cavity, or again the side of Comer Hall. Since we're in the spring and kind of the height of the population, there might be 40,000 workers in there, which are one type of female that do all the housekeeping activities and going and collecting food.
So then that would be each box is a colony, correct?
The whole box together is a hive. Usually these bigger boxes are where we keep or we promote the bees keeping their developing bees and their food. And above in these smaller boxes, especially during spring, like the time we are now in the year, that's where we promote bees collecting their nectar, which they convert into honey. And so the boxes are smaller because, as you can imagine, a box full of honey is pretty heavy, so they're smaller so that we can move them more easily.
So how do they get in and out of the box?
So there's an entrance on the front side, and in these particular hives, we have a pollen trap. So one of our graduate students is collecting pollen to see which plants the colonies are visiting. And so this is really driven by, again, a stakeholder issue. There's an invasive plant called Chinese tallow that the USDA and especially a lot of people interested in conservation are looking to essentially remove because it has pretty dramatic effects on like native plants because it's highly invasive. On the flip side, it is very important, or we think it's very important, to honeybee colonies and even other bee species and flies because it's a good source of nectar and pollen. So we're essentially collecting data to see if that is actually true, and just the role that this Chinese tallow plant plays for all pollinators. So in this case, we've got this pollen trap. It's not activated yet, but essentially we can activate it by closing this little latch, and we'll have a basket underneath here. So the bees, as they're coming back with their pollen, the pollen will get knocked off their legs and it'll fall into this basket, and then our partners at the USDA, they will identify the pollen and which tree those bees have been visiting. Yeah, so this is again a project of one of our grad students, and I think a really great example again of we're addressing like really applied work that hopefully has pretty immediate impacts.
So how do you tell if it's a healthy hive?
Well, there's kind of three things I like to look for: is adequate nutrition, which means that there's nectar and pollen coming into the hive; healthy brood, which is the developing bees. So that means that when I look into a box and I see brood development, it's uniform, it's complete, and it's intact, and there's enough of it. And then good signs of a queen. If we have a good laying queen, then the colony is going to be robust, it's going to grow in size, and it'll have adequate bees. And then equally important as those three things would have to be the health of the hive. And so that gets into more of the finer details, looking for things like signs of varroa mite, perhaps signs of other nuances of other things that might indicate that there is unhealthy conditions in the hive. And so those are all in the back of my mind when I go through a hive, and if it ticks all those boxes, then we just like to close it up, leave it alone. So these boxes have to be taken off one at a time until I reach the typical brood nest, which is where the colony will be. Brood will be in the center, honey and resources will be on the outside, and those will be the home, the permanent home of the colony. And then with the honey flow, we add additional honey supers on top, and this becomes the surplus storage for all the honey and nectar that comes in.
So I guess the larger the hive, the more boxes.
That's right. Some colonies have 2 brood chambers, indicating that that's a large colony that needed additional space. Some colonies are in a single story because they might be smaller. And that's also a part of the beekeeper's responsibility, is to manage the space that the beehive has. So we're constantly taking boxes off, putting boxes on, and arranging the colony so that they have not only enough room to grow, but not so much room that they can't maintain temperature, humidity, and keep pests like mice or hive beetle away. So we don't want to give them too much space, but we want to make sure they have enough room to grow. So what we're doing is right now we're in the midst of our honey flow. And so I'm just checking these colonies to see if and when they're going to be ready to harvest. It looks like this top box has got some nectar in it, which makes sense. The top box is usually the last one to get filled. But I think these lower boxes, they might be ready to harvest. And when I pull out that frame, I can see that we've got nectar that's being fanned down and reduced, removing the water, and then we've got capped honey. And that's the material that we want to harvest. Typically these boxes will fill from the center outwards, so the middle frame kind of tells the tale. You know, it's about 75% capped. I usually wait till it's about 80-90% capped. So this box is very close to being ready to harvest.
And how long do you think it took them, how long did it take them to like fill that?
When they're on a good flow, it can be a box a week.
Oh, wow.
Those are exceptional conditions. Sometimes we only get a box in a season. It really depends on the flower sources that are out there.
And so how much honey would that produce?
Potentially that box is going to be 60 pounds of honey.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're going to pull that box off in a few weeks when it's ready. We'll take it back to the lab, and then from there we'll go through the extraction process, and then we'll bottle it and sell it to alumni, students, anybody who's interested in supporting the Auburn Bee Lab.
So what's the biggest threat to bees?
Gosh, that's a good question, but I'd have to say that the varroa mite is probably my biggest concern. It is a parasitic mite that attaches onto the bee, not so different from a tick landing on a human, and it's feeding on the hemolymph, the blood of the honeybee, but it's also vectoring diseases, viruses. And then on top of that, the reproductive cycle of the varroa mite happens in the brood. And so it's also feeding on developing larvae, developing bees, as well as the adult bees. And so all around, it's a total pest of the colony. And it's got to be the #1 challenge facing beekeepers, is to get on top of your varroa mite.
Yeah. And is that what some of your all's research is on, to help with that, or?
Absolutely. I'd say the majority of the research we do is to try to look at new opportunities, novel ways to use existing chemicals or treatments, and also to confirm the efficacy of new ideas and products for the control of varroa mite.
So talk a little bit about like bees as pollinators. We've talked a little bit about their importance, but I want to dive into that from going back to my elementary science. So what's the big deal with pollination, and how does it impact agriculture?
Sure. So there are, a majority of plants that require insects to actually pollinate their flowers to increase seed production and ultimately, produce either a stronger crop or just produce more seed to keep the planting going. Bees require pollen and nectar as a food source to raise their young. So they collect a pollen and nectar ball, they roll it up, and then they lay an egg on top of it, and they'll either bury that in the soil or inside a stem, for example, a plant stem. And so agriculture areas can really benefit from bee pollination by increasing crop yield. That's the main benefit. And a lot of people do have like honeybees on their property to do that service, but honeybees don't like certain plant species. Sometimes they're not as effective pollinators of certain plants. So sometimes native bees are actually doing most of the legwork particularly for like fruit trees. They're doing most of the legwork for pollination.
Interesting. So a farmer, maybe he wouldn't even have to have the hives or the colony. It could just plant flowers.
Right, and the goal is you're attracting wild bees to the area to then also pollinate the other crops that you have. So, yeah.
Fun. So how many beekeepers are in this state, do you know?
Well, there's a lot of hobbyists in the state for sure. I'd say there's over 1,000. There's a smaller network of commercial beekeepers, people who are either making most of their living, if not all of it. But our hobbyists are a very strong population in the state, and they make up a lot of our shareholders.
And are you seeing a lot of farmers wanting to bring beehives or colonies onto their
we
farm?
get some requests for hives to be on the orchard. There's definitely an increase depending on what the farmer's growing. If they're in fruit production, they may need our bees in order to get adequate pollination. But I think even on some of the commodities like cotton, there's been signs of an increase in lint production with benefit of bees. Soybeans as well see an increase in yields when honeybees are present. So I think it's becoming more and more attractive to the typical farmer to have honeybees on their property.
Yeah. Just kind of create some more of a better environment for everyone, right? The crops, the bees.
It does. It adds diversity. And I think more diversity that we incorporate into our agriculture as we move away from monoculture and maybe towards a more regenerative ag where there's multiple crops being grown and harvested year round. I think that biodiversity is key.
Are you seeing a lot of farmers take this route and have the hives on it in the state?
It's a challenge for farmers to adapt honeybees. Because of a lot of our conventional practices and uses of insecticides and herbicides, it becomes difficult to incorporate honeybees into your program. But that being said, I would say there is an uptick in more organic or regenerative agriculture where these things are becoming more mindful of the total system, not just the singular monoculture crop. And as those ideas gain traction, I think we're going to see more things like honeybees, multiple crops being grown at the same time, even introduction of livestock into the farming. And I think with time, we will see an evolution where it's easier for people to incorporate things like honeybees into their farming.
Yeah, so it could have a huge impact down the road. How much do you help the public and educate the public and the beekeepers about their hives?
Well, I wish we could do more, but I tell you, there's a huge demand for the information. We are getting lots of phone calls, lots of emails every day to go to speaking events, but I would say at least 15% of my time might be directed towards focusing on outreach, whether that's in the form of a speaking engagement or even hosting an elementary school coming to the lab for a tour group. So we really do try to get the information out there. I get it as involved as I can. My focus is on the research, so I am limited by my job description. But I know as a lab, we do as much as we can, and we're often out there trying to spread the word.
So Adler, what do you all specialize in here at East Alabama? You're not just making honey. What's your specialization?
Right,
here?
well, many people think when they think of honeybees, they think of honey that you see in the stores, but there's also a huge market for queens themselves and bees themselves. There's a lot of people starting to get into bees, luckily. There's been a lot of die-off of honeybees, and we at East Alabama Bee Company mainly focus on producing queens. Now, we do get a little bit of honey, but we consider honey a byproduct. Our main focus is producing high-quality queens for the state of Alabama. There's very few people who do that in the state of Alabama, and there's a very high demand for it.
Okay, so then what are we looking at here?
So this is where it all starts. We call this our breeder box. What it entails is we have a queen in here, and she's isolated to 3 frames. That helps us. The way we make our queens is we graft. We basically go into this colony and we take a day 1 larva, and it'll hatch after 3 days from an egg into a larva. And we come and take those larvae out and we graft them. We take them from the cells they're in and we put them into a little fake queen cell and put it on something called a cell bar. And that cell bar holds 15 queen cells, 15 little baby larvae that we get from this queen. This queen has the best traits, the traits we're looking for: disease resistant, good brood pattern. They produce a lot of honey, which is what the beekeepers of Alabama want. They're very gentle to work with. We selected her earlier this year and we want her genetics. So we take her larvae and move them into a big colony with no queen in it. They have no chance to make a queen. And their main goal is to make a queen so they can live. So we use a big queenless colony to make queens from her eggs.
I've got multiple bee yards. We work from really Opp, Alabama in the far south eastern corner of the state, all the way to North Alabama yards. I have some, I'm located, my home base of my operations, about 35 miles northeast of Auburn on the Georgia-Alabama line. So my bees, we have multiple yards around, and we follow what we call the flow. Certain times of the year, it's better for us to be able to have pollen and nectar flows for our queen rearing operation. I want to try to get good quality queens out early in the season as I can, so we work to move bees around. We'll move from south to central to North Alabama so that we can extend our season with that. And it's all temperature, heat, and nectar flow and pollen production, and all those are very important components for us to be able to raise quality queens.
This is our queen, our mated queen, from an egg to a mated queen. And we can do a lot with her. You can bank a mated queen for up to 4 months in this little cage, as long as she has worker bees feeding her from the outside of the cage or the inside of the cage.
So she'll just live in that for 4 months?
She'll just live in this for 4 months. She can. We don't usually have an issue banking our queens because we just sell. We sell majority of our queens direct to consumer. We don't produce a mass amount and then wait.
So then you sell it?
So yeah, most of the time we sell it. We use a lot of our queens for ourselves too. A lot of beekeepers nowadays like to replace their queens every year, every 2 years. If you look back to 10 years ago, the trend was queens were living 8-9 years. That just doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Not 100% sure why, but there's a huge need for queens, and we'll sell her. A lot of people like to replace their queens when their colony gets aggressive, when their colony swarms and tries to make their own queen, but they fail at it. Now remember, not all of my queens get mated. We have roughly a 75% success rate when it comes to mated queens. A lot can happen to this cell. Even though I give this cell optimal conditions, I move it exactly on day 4, put it into a queenless colony that's overloaded. No normal colony will be that size in the wild. With bees, plenty of bees take care of it. Just because it's a big, healthy virgin queen doesn't mean it's going to do a lot. Sometimes they don't get mated properly. They get eaten by a bird when they're mating. They don't hatch right. They get a disease inside the cell, so they die before they even hatch. We look at roughly a 75% success rate. But once that are bred successfully, we'll ship out 90% of them, and we use about 10% on our own colonies to make more bees.
How much do you sell a queen for?
We sell a mated queen for $40 plus $10 shipping and handling.
And you just ship it through the regular mail?
Yeah, so
like a padded package?
Yeah, so we have if you ship out if you buy a queen from us out of state, we'll ship FedEx or FedEx or UPS because they can overnight it a lot better. But we use the Postal Service any other time. The 5 Points location goes to the Birmingham plant, and the Roanoke location goes to the Montgomery plant. So we can get anywhere in the state in 24 hours roughly. But she can survive, she'll survive in that package with these attendants and the food with her, the little candy that's in here. She can survive for 1 or 2 weeks inside of this cage before she dies. And usually what happens when they get delivered, they're held at the post office. They're very heat sensitive. A lot of people worry about bees getting cold in the wintertime. They actually are they can do a lot with the cold. They're made to stay warm, and they're not made to get hot and overheat. And that's really what'll kill them. So a lot of the times when we ship a queen, they'll hold them at the post office, and the beekeeper will have to come pick them up.
And it'll just say live bees or something?
Live bees, yeah. We put a stamp on it. Live bees, keep away from the sunlight, keep away from pesticides.
Okay.
Please call the phone number upon arrival.
So how did you get interested in bees?
Yeah, so I during my undergrad at the University of Maine, I took an entomology course. I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I decided that I liked studying insect diversity. So, because with bees, there are over 500 species here in the state of Alabama, and it's, most people don't really think about there being that many.
Yeah.
So it's really incredible how much diversity they have. They all have different lifestyles. Some nest in the ground, some nest in stems, some come out during certain times of day. Some are even parasitic on other species of bees, so they'll steal the pollen and nectar provisions of another bee and lay an egg on top of it. So yeah, there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, sounds like it. And they're like, for such a small animal, they're like so sophisticated.
Right. And they get quite a bit smaller than this as well.
Wow.
About the size of a grain of rice or even smaller, some species.
Wow.
So
you're a master's student here?
I am a master's student.
What are you hoping to do when you get done?
Well, when I'm done with my master's, my plan is to go for a PhD.
PhD?
Mm-hmm. And then hopefully get most likely some government job.
Doing research as well?
Yep. I would like to stick in research, yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
I think a good thing to do also before really considering grad school is getting out into the workforce. So like working as an undergrad technician is also a really good opportunity for that. Trying to find like what things you're interested in, because you choose a pretty focused topic once you get into your grad studies. So if you're not too sure about it, it's hard to get locked into something like that. Yeah, so I think I am considering grad school definitely, but I definitely want to explore a little more.
Find your niche.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I've always loved honeybees, and I was like, oh, one day I want to have my own bees and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really know how to get into it, and around junior year, I think it was, sophomore, junior year, I was like, oh my gosh, I really have to get research. And I was like looking through all the options my advisors were giving me, and I was like, this just isn't for me. I'm not interested. And then one of my friends was like, Emily, you love honeybees. Like, did you not know about the Auburn Bee Lab? And so I was like, no, oh my gosh, you have to get me this email. And so then I got Dr. Williams' email, and I emailed him up, and he was like, yeah, we want you on the team. And like within a couple months I was here. So it was really just like right place, right time, right connections. So, but yeah, I love it.
So tell me about your experience here as a whole. How has it helped prepare you? You said earlier that you're going to med school?
Yes.
So how's that kind of helped prepare you?
Yeah, so I honestly feel like I've seen a whole different world with the agriculture world and opened up to a lot of different opportunities. But more than anything, I've just learned a lot about research. I didn't have any research experience, and this has been a great way to get a lot of hands-on. I know a lot of my friends oftentimes are doing number crunching or things that are not very, you know, sciencey and active
Yeah.
within the lab. So I've really gotten a lot of hands-on experience. I've met a really great group of people that's a great support system here. And I just enjoyed it. I one day would love to have bees myself, and that's kind of why I got interested in this lab in the first place. So I just had a great time, learned a lot of skills.
So you
yeah.
talked about that greater appreciation for agriculture. How do you think now you'll go out into the world and be a better citizen for agriculture?
Yeah, so I definitely, you know, I definitely think that I've gotten a better appreciation for things like local honey and learning about, you know, like allergies and all that kind of stuff. Going forward in medicine, I think it'll be a little bit hard for me to connect, but I do know there's some really cool stuff like work with arthritis and, you know, certain things that now I might be interested in my future medical career.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, just hopefully one day having my own hives and promoting, you know, the wellness of bees and all that kind of stuff is really my main goal. So.
Yeah, creating a better ecosystem for the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, cool.